Hey, in this video I want to show you around a beautiful forest garden and also find out a little bit more about what agroforestry actually means. So forest gardening is a long-term sustainable growing system, and it uses a layered system to produce food with minimal input. And we're lucky enough to have one right on our doorstep here. We grow mushrooms just down there, and over there there's some woodland, and Martin Crawford, who runs the Agroforestry Research Institute, has got a beautiful food forest there that I want to show you around in, and he's been running that since '97. And really it's a beautiful space. I first visited in 2012 and I'm really excited to go back and meet Martin and see what's happening there. Let's have a look. Martin, thanks for showing us around. How did you end up doing this?
Well, before I was doing this, my wife and I were market gardening, growing veg to sell in Totnes Market here, and we could do that. We trained in it, and it was okay. But market gardening, growing organic veg to sell, is on a small scale is very hard work, and for not a lot of reward. Apart from knowing you've grown nice food, but at that time I discovered what agroforestry was, kind of three-dimensional farming, if you like, and I also discovered what Robert Hart was doing. Now, he's a guy who lived up in Shropshire in the Midlands, and he started the first kind of forest garden experiments in this country in the 1970s, 80s, and he had a small forest garden, 500 square meters, and I went to see what he was doing, and that was quite inspiring, and so I decided to switch direction.
So these gardens are absolutely stunning, and it's about 2 acres, I believe. What kind of scale can you do agroforestry on?
Well, forest gardens, or food forests, which are the same thing, can be done on any scale. So from a back garden scale upwards. So the smallest ones I know about are kind of 50 square meters. You have to make quite a lot of compromises if you're going that small. Most people are at least slightly bigger than that, even if it's their back garden. Upwards, this is 2 acres, as you said, and they go up to about 50 acres, 20 hectares. In the Netherlands, for example, there's a fantastic project run by a guy called Wouter van Eck, doing fantastic work on a bigger scale.
That's really great to know. So if you want to take the next step, what's the best way to go about it?
Well, there's lots of things you can do. We run lots of tours here on our sites throughout the growing season. We run courses, longer courses based here in Dartington. There's an online course. There's books out there as well, and lots of information on our website too.
A forest garden is a layered system of trees, shrubs, perennials and ground covers designed and planted to maximise beneficial species interactions and minimise competitive effects, with the aim of growing a wide diversity of crops, mainly edible plants, but it could be plants for all sorts of other uses, including medicinal plants, and also with the aim of achieving a very low input system, low energy input that is, and good output. Another way to think of a forest garden is as a diversified orchard. So in other words, you start off with your orchard trees, mostly fruit trees of course, and then you start to diversify. You underplant. Downwards you diversify with shrubs and ground covers and perennial crops. And then occasionally you also overplant. In other words, between the trees and above the trees will tower the occasional higher tree, certainly if your system has space. Here, an Italian alder just behind the apple tree. So forest gardens have a very long history in the world. At least 14,000 years from Southeast Asia, probably much longer. In fact, when humans just interacted with forests, they would turn them into forest gardens. They would cut some trees, they would encourage others, they would probably plant the seeds of others, particular fruit trees they wanted or whatever. And you'd gradually turn a natural forest, if there is such a thing, into a forest garden. It's a process of kind of co-evolution. But that history is mostly from the subtropics and the tropics. In the northern hemisphere, forest gardens have a much shorter history, about 40 years in Western Europe and North America. But one of the things in these climates, of course, is we're further north, we're further from the equator, the sun doesn't get as high, we have to be much more careful with how much sun we let through to be able to grow plants between and underneath trees. So tree spacing is critically important here. And of course, you can't put trees together so closely here as you could in the tropics because there just won't be enough light underneath them to be able to grow a big diversity of plants. Another key feature is diversity. Diversity is so important. That is how you get a resilient system, having a lot of different species in it. In this garden there are several hundred. In most forest gardens there are at least 100, probably more, which compared with a monoculture is vastly different. That diversity is one way we're mimicking nature. We're mimicking the diversity of nature, or sometimes even increasing the diversity you find in nature to make a very resilient system, resilient against pests, resilient against diseases, and resilient against whatever the climate throws at it. And of course, in an era of climate change, what is damaging plants, and will do so increasingly, is not the gradual increase in temperatures, but the increase in weather extremes. It's the floods, it's the droughts, etc., that damage plants. And systems based on perennial plants and based on diversity are much more resilient. Another key feature of a forest garden is minimal soil cultivation. The soil is basically covered all year, if possible, certainly most of the year, by living plants, ground covers, perennial crops and so on. You have to remember that annuals are very rare in nature, and actually basing our agriculture on annual plants is in many ways very unnatural. Annual plants are not very sustainable. They're weak, they're susceptible to drought, they're susceptible to floods. Perennial plants are much more resilient. They have bigger root systems, they're more stable, and they can cope with climate variations in a way that annual plants can't. There are spice crops. This is Szechuan pepper, and there are a number of spices you can grow on trees and shrubs. Some of them very high value as well as an economic crop. Mushrooms are another fantastic crop, very suitable for growing in a forest garden. These are my shiitake mushroom logs here. Oak logs inoculated with shiitake fungus, and they are incredibly productive producing mushrooms. Forest gardens are aesthetically beautiful places. They often have a semi-wild feel to them, even though they're cultivated. It does feel as though you're working with nature and are close to nature by being in it, much more so than in a field of grass or a field of wheat. Forest gardens are very efficient systems of production. By efficiency, I'm talking mainly about energy efficiency. You have to remember, annual crops take a huge amount of energy to grow. And that's because the further your system is away from woodland, the more energy you have to put in to maintain it. And digging the soil, cultivating the soil, takes a huge amount of energy. And in the long term, without oil, is it even possible? That's a tricky question. Forest gardens, as you've seen, they're complex systems. They have lots of different plants. They have plants mixed together. Nothing's in lines. These are all things that from a commercial point of view are not good. Commercial systems for making money like to be very simple. One crop, maybe two. Straight lines make harvesting efficient. There's nothing like that in here. So how do you reconcile those two things? Only really by increasing the value that is paid for food, increasing the value that society pays for environmentally sustainable growing systems. That's really the only way it can happen.
So that was great to walk around the garden again with Martin and see how much it's developed since the last time I was here in 2012. And I think the point of feeding ourselves through the use of annual plants and that not being very sustainable is a very clear message and something we should be thinking about. So if you feel like you can get involved in this way of growing food, I'd highly encourage you to do so. Hope you enjoyed that video, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you did, and thanks for watching.